It's okay, it takes time. I know everything will be alright.
Welcome back to season 3. I am so excited to be back here and welcoming some incredible guests. This season is all about family. We want to be talking to people all over the world and learning what family looks like and feels like for them. Tonight, we are welcoming Daniel, who's zooming in all the way from Oklahoma in the United States of America. Welcome, Daniel.
Thank you. Welcome from the United States. Isn't it cool that we can do this, right? With technology?
It is so super cool. It's really, really exciting. We're in our 3rd season. We've talked to women, we've talked to men, and now we're talking to families. So it's great to have you and welcoming you. You're our very first guest for this season. So I'm super, super excited to have you here. Daniel, let's jump right into a little bit about who you are and what brings you to Strong.
Sure. Well, I am, as I mentioned, I was born and raised in the United States in Tulsa. Tulsa is in Oklahoma. And for those that, your international viewers, we kind of call it the Bible Belt. So it's a very conservative, very religious type of portion of the country. And the culture is really unique in Tulsa, especially as it pertains to family and marriage. So, first and foremost, there's not an expectation, but there's kind of the assumption that you finish high school, you go get your college degree, and then you get married. And so you see a lot of marriages that occur of men and women in their early 20s. And I was right in that category. I dated my girlfriend at the time, all through college. We graduated, and the next thing that you do, if you're in the culture, is you get married. So we got married. I was 22 or 23. And within 2 years had our first child and had 3 kids before 30. So, as compared to a lot of many other cultures, even within the United States, if you get into the West Coast or the East Coast, a lot of people wait until they're, early to mid 30s before they decide to get married. So we got married really young, and we had a 22-year marriage, and it just started to disintegrate near the end of it for a number of reasons, which if you'd like to discuss that, we can. And we decided to get divorced about it was a little over 2.5 years ago. So I call myself the divorced dad because I have a platform now that I was kind of led to do. It's kind of a calling to kind of speak to the divorce community, which I think a lot of times is a community that feels shameful, a community that's often ostracized from their friends. And, I wanted to bring these people together and provide support and hope for this community. So that's kind of my passion project, which we can talk about. But, I'm divorced. I have 3 kids, 3 beautiful daughters, 22, 20, and 18. And the youngest is going off to college in a week. So I'll be an empty nester. So I'm really excited about that, actually. Don't tell them. So that's kind of it about me.
Daniel, why are you here? Why are you talking to me? You've never met me. We have nothing that connects us. Why have you agreed to talk to us here at Strong?
I love men and women, and frankly, the majority of people that have platforms to help others seem to be more on the woman's side. So I've participated in a number of platforms and another number of initiatives that really have been catered to helping people in many different ways. It could be empowering women. It could be learning how to navigate through dating as a middle-aged person for the first time. It could be, how to survive a divorce and go through, what I believe is a trauma. And so as I've kind of a way that I've kind of fed this passion project, Maria, is that, anytime there's opportunities where I have a platform to speak and kind of tell my story, especially with like-minded people like yourself, where you have a heart for helping people, then I'm all about it. And I love the opportunity that it doesn't have to be local or even regional, that it can be all across the country, because, the needs that a middle-aged divorced person has is not geographical. So the pain and the suffering that someone goes through in a divorce and the shame is no different in Tulsa, Oklahoma, as it is in Dubai, or it is in Lagos, Nigeria, or Moscow, Russia. The emotions are the same. And so it really has the ability to kind of bring people together because we all suffer those types of emotions. So I'm here to support you because I love what you're doing. And I love the fact that you are all about helping people. You have a heart for that. And so I'm glad to be on and talk with you about this.
It's so exciting to talk to you about this for a couple of reasons. For me personally, I'm on a mission to break down the status quo, these ideas that we have of what people should be looking like and how they should sound, and really raising the platform to everyday people becoming the role models for our youth. And I think this is one of the challenges that I see happening more and more, is that young people, they look to, their role models, and these role models tend to be people they have absolutely nothing in common with. They're on social media, they're either on the big screen, or they're even, that exception to the rule. And by having these conversations, and especially this season when we are talking about family, I'd like us to be breaking down the barriers of what we show people and what really is and what exists. Because I think this is that gap where young people are feeling really isolated, because on the one hand, they want to be in that popular group. They want to be with their peers and looking like everything's going well. But on the other hand, their family dynamics might be very, very different. So let's jump right into the culture that you described to us, in that, you went to high school, you went off, you got a degree, you got married, you had children, and that was that life cycle. And I find this really interesting because I can resonate with what you're saying. I feel like I was raised in that very similar kind of a culture, but I never remember anybody telling me I had to do it that way. It almost seemed like a very subtle understanding that that's what people did. Would you say
Right.
that was similar for you?
100%. I think that I agree. I don't think that they're my parents nor my ex-wife's parents, or anybody else in our community that was close to me or my ex. Probably, I don't think I ever heard an explicit statement from them saying, you need to get married. That's the next thing to do. But at the same time, I wasn't getting coaching from my parents as far as, hey, you need to go out and discover yourself. You need to go out and live life a little bit and experience and gain some wisdom and some practical experience before you start to make major life decisions. So it kind of goes both ways, where it's not mentioned, this is what you need to do, but on the flip side, I didn't receive the coaching of what I should have done, in hindsight. And, I've tried to pay that forward with my kids. And it was interesting, just a funny analogy, just the fact that my kids, at least one of them, had that mindset of our culture. But I had one daughter that was dating someone fairly seriously, and she was already like planning the kids, the marriage. She's in college, and I was like, I in a nice way, I said, slow it down a little bit. You need to experience life. And I got one of those glaring looks from her, like, what are you talking about? And, the relationship didn't work out. And it really gave her on her own time to reflect and think about what she wants. She's very mature for her age. And she came back and she said, I need to be single for a while. There's lots of things in life that I need to do and experience before I maybe jump into the next relationship. And so, I'm sitting there going, yes, that's exactly what I want to hear. But I can't take any credit for it because she didn't listen to my coaching. She had to come to that conclusion. So you're right. I wish that we were more, whether it was a parent, whether it was a mentor, someone in leadership within the culture would encourage these kids as they grow up that, there's an incredible opportunity once you get your education, when you come out of that, to really experience life a bit and discover yourself. I read, and I don't know if this is true, that I think that the brain doesn't fully mature for, I think, men or boys until like they're 25. So why in the world would you get married before 25 years old? Your brain's not even there yet. And so I wish there was more of that, kind of passing down or mentoring the wisdom that some of us have learned, so that some of our kids would kind of break that cycle a little bit.
So let's dive deeper into your story. I always want to keep these stories very relevant to our experiences, and I think sometimes as adults we tend to preach, and hashtag strong is about let's just talk about what life looks like from our perspective. So take me through how you came to terms with being that family father that was in, society's version of the family, and 3 children, a wife, a job. You had life basically the way that it felt like it should be. And then how did you feel coming out of that? Did you feel that you were prepared for it? Did you feel that society, supported you through that? How was that change and transition from your perspective?
I think, first of all, and I touched on this a little bit, at 22 years old, I don't think that I was in any stage of maturity to where I should have been making significant life decisions. And, I still kind of didn't know what I wanted in life, for sure. I still don't know what I wanted in life, and I'm 47. And, but for me, as I think back, because I've done a lot of self-reflection, I thought, I've dated this girl for 4 years. I love her, and she's ready to take it to the next step, which is to get married. She was very explicit about that. And I'm okay with that. Okay, sure. That was kind of my personality. It wasn't, well, let me think about what do I want. And so for me, it was like graduate from college. It was kind of a step-by-step process. Graduate from college, get my job, and get married, and then start making babies. And that's what she wanted. And I was okay with that. I was like, that sounds great. So it was almost like go with the flow. And, what happens is when you dive into that, you get so busy so quickly that you don't even really kind of you're kind of in the weeds all the time. And you really don't ever get to step back and kind of reflect, okay, where is my life? Am I happy with it? How could I improve it? And then 20 years passes, so having kids, start my career. Well, I was a very ambitious, driven person. So I'm working 40, 50, 60 hours a week. And then we have kids 2 years into our marriage. So now I'm juggling work, come home, kid number 1, we have kid number 2, we have kid number 3. And all of a sudden you're just super busy. And there's a lot of things in hindsight that I wish I'd done, which we can talk about. But for me, it was almost like a blur. I was telling my kids this yesterday over dinner. I was like, I remember, I vividly can recall my memories of each of my kids at 16 to where they are today. But like from 0 to 10, it's like, I hardly remember that. It was like one big blur. And, I think, so part of that is just the ability to reflect, right? And I just didn't do that because I was A, too busy, and B, I really probably didn't know how to do it. But, I think from the perspective of our marriage, we essentially became partners that was managing a family, and we weren't investing in each other. And, like many marriages, whether it's here in the US or anywhere in the world, it was kind of that slow drift. It's like where we were kind of 2 ships that were kind of going different directions. And I think that then you start to add the stress of life, the trials that we go through. And when you're not aligned with your spouse or someone you're in a relationship with, when you're in a trial, it exacerbates it. It makes it more difficult, right? And so, I think it just made the marriage start to deteriorate as we were going through some issues. And we kind of finally came to a point where we sat across from each other and we were like, is this repairable? We both didn't think it was. And Okay, well, what do we do about it? Do we want to wait for the kids to graduate and be unhappy and live in a toxic environment for 2, 3 more years? Or do we want to go ahead and do this and manage it? And we decided to go ahead and pull the trigger.
Sorry, did you feel that society supported you through that transition, or did you kind of feel like you fell off the map a little bit?
Well, society in general doesn't support divorces. Otherwise we would mediate all divorces, and we would have good counseling at the front end to support making decisions to get married. And the church, the body of the church, regardless of what religion, would support people that are in need, which are divorced men and women, and they don't. And I don't want to generalize because there's exceptions to that, but by and large, there isn't a whole lot of support. And that's why I really equate a divorce as being a trauma. It's nearly like a death, because you're severing this root system that you've built for 20, 25 years with someone else. It's not just your spouse, but it's the kids, and it's all the money and the wealth that you've accumulated, and it's the in-laws and the friends, and you're just severing that in one fell swoop and then trying to regrow again separately. So, family's always was there for me for support. I didn't have any friends, which is why I started Divorced Over 40. So I didn't really have any friends at all that I could lean on, which in hindsight, I wish that I had better balance in my marriage with guy friends. So no, I didn't feel really supported. And I just felt, other than my family, and I just felt like, really my healing process from my divorce was entirely myself. I didn't seek therapy. I didn't read self-help books. I did a lot of kind of just thinking, a lot of being alone, and a lot of, what now has become a lot of journaling, a lot of writing and expressing my opinions and what I went through. But that's the problem with divorces culturally across the country, is that, number one is that they're stigmatized as people that fail. And so you already have that cloud around you that you're having to deal with, but there's just not a lot of support from the community, from friends, from, the church or religious organizations. And so I'm hoping that my community that I'm building fills that gap during the healing process after trauma.
So I want to pick up on something you mentioned, and I can resonate with you as well. I'm also divorced, and I found it really challenging to kind of find my feet and find my grounding in this experience that I like you said, I felt like I had failed. Again, I don't ever remember anybody telling me that I had failed. On the contrary, I had a lot from family telling me, you did your best. It didn't work out. Nobody failed, but I felt like I had failed. And it's this assumption that we make. Do you feel that people of divorce, or from your experience, of course, we cannot generalize, but do you feel that from your experience that you felt you failed and you were putting that pressure that society had kind of seen you as failing?
Absolutely. And again, I think like you, Maria, it was all self-imposed. And I don't know, I haven't quite figured out why we do that, but I went through the guilt of failing, from a man's perspective. It may or may not be a little bit different from a female's, but from a man, we just don't like losing. We're competitive in nature. And so the thought of failing, it's no different from losing a job. I think it's really a check to the ego, in that, I couldn't keep a 22-year marriage together. And that's my job as the provider of my family. That's kind of how I looked at it, subconsciously. And so I went through the depression. I went through the shame. I went through the guilt, and really had to process all of those. And so it wasn't anything that someone was saying, well, gosh, you're a failure. It was self-imposed. And, I think that part of the reason why, if you go into my social media, channels, you see Daniel Harold, the divorced dad. It's because I'm trying to make divorce not such a bad word anymore, because it seems like it is. And a lot of people have asked me, why are you putting divorce next to your name? I'm like, because I think being divorced is okay. We all fail at lots of different things. And so why should someone judge me just on failing in a marriage? When in many cases, it's the best thing for both of us to do is to terminate a marriage and kind of relive our lives. And so that's kind of the message that I'm trying to cast, is that it's okay, and that there is life after divorce, and divorced people can be cool too, and can still have fun and still kind of rewrite the next chapter of their lives.
How do you feel about being divorced, and what does family look like for you now? When you hear that word family, if you were to define your version of family, what would it be?
Well, family, it's changed, and a lot of it still makes me sad, and a lot of it is so much healthier. I think that and I would argue that regardless of the ages of your kids, it's still painful for your kids. And so just because your kids are 16, 17, 18, and they've probably seen the dynamics of the family and know that this is not a good thing, this isn't healthy, still painful. And so where I was blessed is I had my ex-wife and I were very much aligned in how we were going to support and love our kids, but then also how we were going to treat each other with a level of respect. And we've maintained that. And so family is different in that, you lose kind of this whole other side of, the in-laws and the sister-in-laws and brother-in-laws and the cousins on that side. And that part's sad. And I know that there's certain divorces where, one spouse is very much kept in tune with that other side of the family. With mine, we've set some clear boundaries. I still communicate with my in-laws, but not near the frequency that I did before. And we used to vacation with them, and they were my parents. And so that part of it is different, and you have to change and adjust to that. But it's also exciting a little bit at the same time. Maria, I was thinking about this. I never have had the ability to make autonomous decisions from the age of 0 to 45. So think about that. So leading up until when I graduated from college, my parents dictated pretty much most of my life because they paid for things, right? They were supporting me all the way through college. And then I jumped right into a marriage where now I have a 50% say. So I never had a 100% vote in how I would dictate things until I got divorced. And for me, that was an exciting feeling because I've never experienced it before. And it allowed me as a family, from a family perspective, to do things differently. Not necessarily to correct what I thought were bad behaviors or bad practices, but to set new traditions. So for example, every summer I road trip with my girls, and we drove 24 hours to Los Angeles. We drove to Colorado. This past summer, we went to the beach. And so they are so excited about that because that wasn't what we did when we were a married unit. And so I've created that new tradition. And then just the tradition of having my girls with my mom and, the dinners that we have. I now cook, whereas I didn't cook before. So, preparing a meal for my kids, they love that. And so that's the new dynamic of a family. And then you start to insert relationships into that as well. And it kind of just adds a new element to it. So, there's some sad things that, obviously have to change, especially if you were close with in-laws. But there are new exciting opportunities that you can create with this new family as well, in terms of traditions and things like that.
How is it different? I know you talked about some of the new traditions you've created with the girls. It sounds like you've probably bonded with them even better than you were before, when you were so busy doing all the things that you were doing as a married man and a dad as well. But now being a single dad, how has that communication improved or hasn't with the girls? How are they communicating with you now that the divorce is settled and they've come to terms with this new version of your family?
Well, they're seeing a new Daniel for sure, because, it's almost as if, once the divorce occurred, and particularly when I started this community and really started writing, I opened I started to become vulnerable, and they never really seen that. Dad always kind of had a hard shell, and he never expressed his emotions. And here he is talking about his divorce and dealing with loneliness and shame and guilt, and trying to find friends, and starting to see Dad as someone that can fail. And so I think that's opened their eyes, and it's really created opportunities. And some of it is just age and them growing up, but I think a lot of it is because I've been open and vulnerable. It's created opportunities where I can really invest in them. And, instead of the typical teenager, oh, Dad, leave me alone. There are these moments, not all the time, but there are these moments in which I can get them to be vulnerable with me and talk about boys and dating and life in general. And to the extent that I can provide a little bit of wisdom or a couple of nuggets of things. That's a careful line, because kids don't like their advice from their parents, but being able to share with them. And it's not perfect. And a lot of times I always default back to heads down and grinding. And then next thing you know, it's 5 days and I haven't messaged anybody or communicated. And so I'm working on me to become more attentive to the people that I love, and to be more responsive and communicate better. But I do think that being open and vulnerable, and not all men are, as you know, but that part of me that changed really opened, I think, the door even wider to my kids to see who Daniel was, that he was fallible, that he was a person that cared and loves people, and that he's a person that wants to work on himself. And that helped me cultivate better relationships with them. So it's been nice.
What's loneliness like for you? You come across as a very confident, emotionally available, very attuned with your feelings, and lots of self-awareness that you've gained in this time. But you mentioned that you're showing the girls that you're a vulnerable person as well, and topics like loneliness and shame and guilt have come in. What does that look like from your perspective?
Well, I experienced loneliness. I think in hindsight, I experienced, because of a lack of physical intimacy, a sense of loneliness in the latter part of my marriage. So as we started to lose that intimacy, and we started to lose maybe some of the emotional intimacy, you're lonely because you crave it, right? And so I definitely had that in my marriage, but then it kind of gets amplified when you move into an apartment and it's just you. And those first 90 days, after I moved out, is when it's hard. It's when you really kind of see the new reality. All these changes are occurring. You're not a happy person to begin with during that time. And also you're incredibly lonely. And by not having any guy friends other than couple friends who really don't want to, they want to disassociate with you, whether they'll tell you or not. It's like, we're going to leave those guys alone for a while. We're not going to pick sides, but and I wouldn't reach out to them anyway. I remember going to happy hour with a guy, a friend of mine. And I said, hey, we ought to do this monthly. I was really excited to see him. We hadn't caught up in a long time. He's like, I'd really love to do it, but could it maybe be over coffee instead of out for drinks? And I knew that was probably coming from he was being sensitive to his wife and going out to have drinks with a single man. So it kind of made me chuckle. But yeah, I think that what happens is, because we talk about this a lot in our community, Maria, is So what people do is when they get lonely is they try to fill that void a number of different ways. And most of them are unhealthy. Part of it for me was I dove into work even harder, and which was, probably good and bad, but what was good is I really dove into working out, and I spent a lot of time just almost every day, 2 to 3 hours. It was like, I'm so glad that I did it in hindsight. I don't do it at that frequency, but it really was therapeutic. I'm releasing endorphins. It was the one good thing in my life at the time that I could say, well, something looks good or something's right. And so that was good. But the bad things that a lot of people do is they turn to substances, alcohol, or other drugs, which I didn't do, fortunately. But a lot of times people will turn to alcohol to fill that void and to numb themselves. And a lot of people, which I did, was jump right into dating because you're looking for connection. You're looking for someone that says, well, you look good, and flirts with you and gives you affection. And I'd never experienced that other than with my spouse. And so, because I really didn't date a whole lot of people in my lifetime. So I dove right into dating. And I learned very quickly that not only was I not ready, but I was hurting people and I was doing it for the wrong reasons. I was doing it for that connection. And so, but it took some self-reflection to get through that. And in hindsight, if there's wisdom that I could give to people that are going through the loneliness phase, which usually occurs real early in a divorce or separation, it would be to find a tribe, to find friends, particularly friends that are in the same boat as you, they're divorced, and to really connect and dive into those people or that person. And because you're dealing with someone that's like-minded, that needs it as well. And it's a great distractor to get you away from maybe the things that you shouldn't be doing, like dating. And so that's what we've created, or we're trying to create, is an opportunity for people that say, well, I've lost all my friends. Maria, what am I supposed to do? All my friends are married. I don't have any, and I don't even know where to go make new friends. And I can come to them and say, I know, because I experienced that, but I've created this community that you can just plug in like that. And as long as you're brave and willing to show up, we've created the venue where everybody there is just like you in the same exact boat. And the transformations that I've seen with people of, hitting them at the right time, at the right place, just when they needed it, is really incredible. I wish that I had had it when I was going through my first 3 to 6 months of my divorce.
Oh, Daniel, you touched on a few things. What about now? You talked about dating early on and saying that, you really should have waited a little bit longer. Have you now met someone and introduced that new person to your daughters?
I have. I got, when I just started, when I created this community, it wasn't really even formalized, but we were, last summer, we were doing weekly cookouts, and it always was 15, 20, 25 people. They were all divorced, all in their 30s, 40s, and 50s. And we were just there to socialize. There wasn't hookups. There wasn't people looking for dates. We were just passing the time. And I'd started to create that environment. And for the first time after my divorce, which was about 18 months after my divorce, I was like, I love being single. This is fun. I like having friends and doing things with friends and not putting all that pressure on myself to go try to find someone to date. And I met someone at the event organically, and we just celebrated our 1 year in which I first met her at one of the cookouts. So, and I took that really slow. I was very explicit with her that I don't know if I'm, we first started dating. I was like, I'm not in a position where I'm looking for anything serious right now, because I really wasn't. So let's keep things slow and casual. And I just fell in love with her, over the course of, the first 90 to 120 days, and vice versa. And this was last year as we were heading into the holidays. And usually if I dated anyone for any length of period of time. I never really even talked to my kids about it, but this was one that, I needed to introduce to the kids. And we were that far into post-divorce that everyone was pretty much healed, including the kids. They were in a good spot. And when your kids are in a good spot, they want dad and mom to date, and they want them to be happy. And so, talking to them about, hey, I met someone and she wants to meet you, and they were excited to meet her. And so we were at this very apartment. I cooked for all three of my kids here, and Jamie, my girlfriend. That was the first opportunity in which they met her, and they love her, and she loves them. And so it's just been we've spent the holidays together, and she sees them. She's very well entwined, and frankly, my girl's mom thinks she's great, and I think my ex's boyfriend is great, very supportive, and knows how to keep healthy boundaries, and so it's just been really, a lot of times that can go the wrong way, as especially if the kids aren't ready, or if you introduce someone too soon. But I knew I was ready. I knew where my heart was, but it was funny because it came from a position of really embracing being single and not really looking. And it's almost like you have that confidence and you feel happy about yourself. And that's when you're the most attractive. And, you end up finding someone organically, which is what I did.
Going back to the culture that you come from, marriage is a thing. Is it still something that you think about moving into your life?
I really don't. And I don't, I think that my girlfriend is aligned, from that perspective as well. I mean, we talk about, could you ever see yourself getting married again? Just in like more, general terms. I don't know if that defines me. It's kind of like and that's kind of the new norm that I think that needs to be discussed. I mean, why does marriage define a relationship? You look at like Oprah Winfrey, and can't remember the gentleman that she's been with for years and years and years, and they're not married. And, you start to see that with people that are a little bit more public figure. But I think I would be completely content having a partner that even jointly, throwing everything together, financials, assets, etc., but never having to go through the formal process of being married. I mean, I used to, when I first got out of my marriage, I was like, well, I'm never going to get married again, or it's going to be a long time down the road. Well, I met someone that I'd be open to that, but I don't feel the pressure that I need to just, now that I've met someone, that's the next step, if that makes sense. For me, it's like, let's just take things one day at a time. And we're slowly, as we're developing this relationship, we're slowly doing more things together. There might be a point in time in which we decide, do we want to live together? Or, whatever it might be. And so that's a little bit more of my stance, is kind of taking it one day at a time, not putting pressure on myself. My kids never ask, are you going to get married? Are you going to marry her? Or what, are you going to get married again? So it's not really something that we're openly discussing. And it's not something that I think would redefine me as someone that's been successful. I feel like I'm there, and I've met someone that's great. And I don't know if saying I'm married and having a ring on my finger does anything more to enhance that.
Would you say that your married friends are allowed to go out with you now?
If I bring my girlfriend, Jamie, yes. All of my friends now are divorced guys. There's a couple that I still keep in touch that are married, and some that have gotten divorced, right? And so, yeah, they probably would, but I've gravitated towards people that are kind of in the same boat. And I think it's important to have better balance. And tomorrow I'm going out with two friends that I've cultivated that are my age. They both have been in a divorce, within the last, call it 2 years. And we're just going out for dinner to catch up. And so I'm really trying to be intentional in maintaining and cultivating relationships with guys, which I never did before. It's incredibly fulfilling, and it's something I need to work on in terms of just being a better friend and being more attentive. And I write to that. It's funny. I've been writing all last week about it and what it takes to be a better friend. And the last post that I made, I was like, look, all these things that I'm throwing out there doesn't mean that I'm there. I'm working on all of these things. I just recognize where I need to be and the types, what a friend needs to look like, and what I need to be. I need to look like that person. So it's a work in progress. But I bet some of my married guy friends would go out with me, or they'd be allowed to.
What is it like to be you on a day that you're not as confident?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm a natural introvert. And so if I'm just feeling beat up emotionally, then I just go into my hole. And so I don't communicate well. My apartment becomes a mess. I become cluttered in my mind and in physical form too. And that happens. I mean, that happens, quite a bit on occasions. And so that's kind of how I look, probably, is I just kind of go into my hole and then kind of work through it. Or, my girlfriend she can size that up when I'm going through those periods. And so she knows, hey, this is a time that either I need to back off, or maybe I need to invest a little bit more. So.
And how did you learn to be in relationship again? Because being married, you were so young, and you kind of, it almost sounded like you were on a journey, and you were kind of just going where the journey took you. There wasn't any conscious awareness of what you were doing. You were just kind of going along. And I think many of us who did marry young, that's just the way it was. And now here you are, after recovering and finding yourself again and understanding, this is what Daniel feels like when things are not going well. And this is what Daniel feels like when he's, playing his A game. What's it like to then go back into a long-term relationship where you have to be conscious about the other person? And although you are autonomous, but you're still part of an entity that is not just about you, isn't it? What's that like?
Yeah, because that's a great question. And I think step one was one thing that I did well is I had enough humility to recognize what I contributed in a failed marriage, what I did wrong, and what I needed to work on. I'll give you an example, not to just generalize that. So the way that I would respond to conflict with my ex-wife would be passive aggressiveness. I would just bottle up and not have a conversation, or not. I just, there's that saying, never go to bed with someone, with your relationship where you're fighting. You need to resolve it. And I was the antithesis of that. We'd get in a fight, we'd argue about something. I would bottle up and not even really present how I felt or acknowledge what I'd done wrong. And we'd go to sleep angry at each other. And then I'd wake up the next day like nothing had happened, and she wasn't like that. And so it took a lot of reflection to say, okay, it takes two to tango. And, there's lots of things in my behavior and my patterns that I need to change to be a better boyfriend or a better partner to someone. And so I recognize those, listening better, being more attentive to those type of things. It's interesting because, obviously being a year in, we've had some fights and some conflicts, and I've really dove into those. And she behaviorally was like me. And so, we'd get into something where I could clearly tell she was upset about something that I did. And I tried to address it head on, and she didn't want anything to do with it. She's like, you just have to leave me alone for a little bit. Let me process this. I was like, no, we're going to deal with this. So it's one thing to like, for me to like deal with it, but it's other to really listen and say, and instead of, I think a lot of times when people get in fights or arguments, you tend to be defensive, right? You're like, well, this is why, or be on attack versus taking what they're saying, thinking about it. And either if you feel like there needs to be a different perspective, you communicate that, or acknowledging you're wrong. And, and then changing the behavior. That's probably the most important thing. So, I'll give you a great example there. So, we always text each other first thing in the morning. Good morning. How'd you sleep? And many months ago, probably 6 to 9 months ago, she'd text me and I didn't respond. And then she'd see that I posted on social media. Mm-hmm. And so she in her mind is thinking, well, I'm number 2 behind. Clearly that's more important than I am. And she kind of ignored it, but then it would happen on occasion. I didn't do it all the time, but it really started to kind of nag at her until finally she wanted to communicate it. And, for me, I wasn't even cognizant of what I was doing behaviorally. She made it aware to me, and I could have argued whatever. Well, I mean, or I could have lied. I set up those posts. They were, whatever it might be. But I was like, you know what? You're right. I'm sending a message to you, whether I mean to or not, that this is more important that I get this done before you. And so I think that was something that I would have never done in my marriage. It's just like reflect and admit that you're wrong, but then changing the behavior and not getting back into that pattern. And, to this day, every morning I'm texting her good morning, and I'm not jumping into work or social media. I think that she feels validated that I'm listening to her concerns. And what that will do is that will help in the future when she has something else that she is concerned about or that bothers her, that instead of her holding it in, which a lot of people do, and then build resentment until it gets to where it's like at a boiling point, she's able to communicate that early and for us to deal with it. So, the new relationship for me is trying to be the better Daniel and be the better partner. Really. So it's being more attuned when conflicts arise. It's also for me to reflect, well, these are behaviors that I need to change from what I did in the marriage that contributed to the divorce. And just continuing to invest. I'm a big believer that, if you stop investing in someone that you have a relationship with, that muscle is going to get weak, and it's going to be more attuned to being injured, or for something to come in and cause issues. And so I feel like there always needs to be a constant investment. Believe me, Maria, I am far from being perfect. It's a work in process, but at least just being aware of what I need to work on, I think, is a good first step.
I love that you brought this up again. Perfect. This word perfect. I don't believe in perfection. And I think this is where we set ourselves up to feel like a failure, is when we think that we have to get it perfect. Life is filled with imperfections, isn't it? And you mentioned again about, my marriage failed, but it didn't fail. It just reached its full capacity, and it was time for the next chapter. That's how I see it anyway. Daniel,
I think you're right.
It was so much fun talking to you. I really enjoyed hearing your perspective and hearing from a man talk about divorce. Very often, men, like you said, don't really open up about these conversations, or maybe not on a public platform. So it was very, very great. How can we find you if we are going through challenges in our marriage and wanting to transition post-divorce?
Well, the best place to find us, and then you can find me from there, so we'll just start at one point and make it easy, is to go to either our website, which is divorcedover40.com. And then all of our social media channels are from there. And then I write very regularly on Divorced Over 40, so you can see my content. And so I blog on the side, because I think if I blog so much on Divorced Over 40, people would get tired of me. So I do a lot of my own writing. of just my life and things that I'm going through, but then I contribute over on the divorce side. So, and we've got, Marie, we call them tribes, but we've got communities growing all over the world. We just recently are starting one in Colombia. A young woman reached out to us from finding us and said, I want to create what you guys are doing in Tulsa in Colombia. In Barranquilla is the city. And so we've got Lagos, we've got the UK. And so we've got, regardless of where you are in the world, like I said, divorce is something that is a common denominator that many of us will all have in our community, but we can also create a community in your backyard, wherever you live. We can help facilitate that so that you can cultivate friendships and then pay it forward to those that are going into a divorce.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Daniel. And that brings us to the end of an incredible conversation. Today, we were speaking to Daniel, who zoomed in all the way from Oklahoma in the United States of America. I will see you all next week when we bring another incredible story to Strong.